Here are 8 things I wish someone told me before starting Jiu Jitsu. And in this video, I'm gonna break it all down for you so that way you can avoid the same mistakes, traps, and injuries I've experienced over the last decade of grappling on the mat. Number 1, don't train to win, train to get better. This is a lesson that literally took me over 10 years to learn. And I've been grappling for, at this point, 12 years. I wrestled in middle school and in high school, and I wasn't good enough of a wrestler, nor did I even want to wrestle in college. And that's really when I found Jiu Jitsu. And what I had learned or what I had experienced in wrestling was really just trying to win at all costs. Every single practice was about winning at all costs. It wasn't really focused necessarily on getting better. I did get better from wrestling a little bit, but going into every single practice, all I wanted to focus on was just to win. And when I started training jiu-jitsu, I brought in the same mindset. And I really do feel like that mindset held me back in my jiu-jitsu for a long period of time. And here's the reason why. When you go into each training session and you're just trying to win every single sparring round, you subconsciously start trying to avoid failure. And when you start to avoid failure, you end up avoiding the learning as well. You see, failure is part of the learning process. You try something new, chances are you suck at it and you're gonna fail. So then you go back to the drawing board, brainstorm on what you can do better next time, and try again. And if you're going into every single training session with the sole purpose of only trying to win, it narrows your focus into only doing the things that you know you can be successful at. It doesn't really encourage you or motivate you to try new things and make improvements to your game because you're only focusing on what you know to work. And you can get this tunnel vision that ultimately in the long run can hold you back from making progress in jiu-jitsu. It wasn't until I became a purple belt and I ended up experiencing a pretty serious knee injury that I was forced to only train to get better. My knee was obliterated. I couldn't do all the same techniques that I was really used to doing with success over and over and over again. I had to learn something new simply because I couldn't use my knee for a period of time. And that really prompted me and helped me to go into training sessions without the extreme focus of only trying to win, but trying to find ways that I could get better. If you focus on going into every training session with the intention of getting better for that session and stacking those sessions over the weeks and the months of the years of training on the mat, you're going to see some incredible progress and you're going to make massive gains in your overall grappling ability. Number 2, injuries are going to happen and you're responsible for keeping yourself safe. Jiu-jitsu is a combat sport and injuries are going to happen. It's not about if they will happen, it's only about a matter of time on when they will happen. Now, there's nothing that you can do to completely prevent injury from happening, but there sure is a bunch of stuff that you can do to drastically decrease your risk of injury from happening. The biggest thing that you can do to decrease your risk of injury on the mat is to get stronger. Because remember, no one ever got injured because they were too strong. And the number one thing you can do off the mat to improve your performance and decrease the risk of injury on the mat is to get stronger. When you get stronger, you're strengthening your muscles, your ligaments, your tendons. You're improving your body's ability to absorb force and withstand force. So you're building yourself to be more durable, to handle the stressors that you experience as a grappling athlete on the mat. And speaking of getting stronger, I wanted to let you know that I'm giving away my brand new training program, Grappler Accelerator, completely for free. This is a world-class training program designed to help you enhance your grappling athleticism so you can feel and perform your best on the mat. This training program is fully equipped with strength and conditioning workouts, a simple and clean diet plan, a complete recovery guide, and a super sleep toolkit so that way you can optimize your training, your nutrition, and recovery so that way you can lift heavy and roll hard. You can get this training program for free by going to thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler or just clicking the link in the description below. The next thing that you can do to drastically decrease your risk of injury on the mat is just to train with trustworthy training partners. If there's that big spazzy guy that's always injuring his training partners, you don't have to roll with him. You can always politely decline and say, nah, I'm not going to roll this round, bro. I'll catch you at another time. You definitely don't have to say yes to anybody. It doesn't matter if they're asking you as an upper belt or you're a upper belt and they're a lower belt. It literally doesn't matter. It's you're the one who's responsible for keeping yourself safe on the mat, and you can decline any role that you want. There are people that I know for myself that I've kind of seen how they roll, and especially when I was coming back from injury, I made sure like I stayed as far away as I could from those people. They would ask me to roll, and I was like, nah, man, I'm actually just going to sit this one out, but appreciate you asking. You need to do what's best for you in order to keep yourself safe on the mat. Now, that doesn't mean that you should be a pansy and be ducking hard, challenging, tough training partners, but there definitely is a difference between having someone who's a tough training partner and having someone who's a dangerous training partner. Now, this next tip for decreasing risk of injury may seem very obvious, but it's worth repeating anyways, and that is to tap early and tap often. I have had only two major injuries over the last 8 years of doing jiu-jitsu. One of them was to my neck, and that was because I did not tap early and I did not tap often. I did not care if it was a choke, a crank, if someone was twisting my head off. It did not matter. If I could still see, I was not tapping. And I really regret doing that because it led to a ton of just wear and tear and a huge injury in my neck that caused a bunch of nerve damage in both of my arms and took me several years to fully recover from. I know when I was a blue belt that people were telling me to tap early and tap often, but I didn't do it, and I had to pay the price for that. It led to a huge neck injury that took me forever to recover from. Thankfully, my neck is okay, so I could still roll pretty hard, but I definitely don't roll the same way I used to. I have learned my lesson, and I hope you guys don't have to learn the same lesson and can just avoid that by tapping early and tapping often. The last thing that you can do to drastically decrease your risk of injury on the mat is just to not train like a dingus. We all know what training like a dingus is like. It's, not tapping early, not tapping often. The mats are wet and slippery, and you start trying to do flying arm bars and scissor takedowns and all that other crazy stuff. Just don't train like an idiot. Don't train like a dingus, and I guarantee your risk of injury is going to drop significantly. Now, that also kind of goes back to what I was saying about picking safe training partners. If there are people that you see train like a dingus, you probably should avoid rolling hard with them as much as you can. Because if they're going to train like a dingus, they put you at risk for injury just as much as they put themselves at risk of injury. Number 3, no one cares if you get tapped in training. Seriously, nobody is driving home thinking about how you got tapped by a lower belt in training that day or even by an upper belt. No one cares. No one's thinking about it. And if you follow tip number 1 about training every day to get better, chances are you're going to be tapping out a lot because you're going to be trying new things and you may come across failure where you do get caught in a submission, and that's totally okay. This is a mistake that I made as a white belt, as a blue belt, and even as a purple belt. There were plenty of times where I remember once I got promoted to blue belt, I thought that that meant I should not be getting tapped by a white belt anymore. And sure enough, a couple months later, I got armbarred by a white belt, and I was super butthurt about it. And it took me a while to mature and realize, like, look, we're all just training to get better. Everyone gets tapped. Everyone gets tapped by upper belts. Everyone at one point has been tapped by a lower belt. No one cares, and it doesn't matter. That brings me to number 4. No one cares who you tapped in training. Nobody is thinking about or keeping track of who you tapped out in training. And I'll be honest, the first time you tap out an upper belt feels amazing. I remember the first time as a white belt when I tapped out a blue belt. I remember the first time as a blue belt when I tapped out a black belt. Now, at the time, I thought I definitely submitted him. And now looking back, I think like, yeah, he probably gave that to me. And when I was a purple belt, I was tapping upper belts and lower belts, and no one cares who you tap. It seriously doesn't matter. You never know what someone else is going through before that training session. An upper belt, like a brown or a black belt, might come and do a training session, and maybe you're a young, hungry blue or purple belt, and maybe you submit them. You don't know what they were doing earlier that day. You don't know if they just did some crazy workout or they're training for a marathon and jiu-jitsu is like just something they're doing for fun on the side. You don't know if they're coming off of an injury and they're being real conservative to keep themselves healthy and not re-aggravate that injury. You don't know if they're trying something new, if they're following tip number 1 and training to get better and trying something completely new, and maybe you catch them and you end up submitting them. That's great. It honestly doesn't matter. No one cares if you get tapped out. No one cares who you tap out. And if you're an upper belt and you do get tapped by a lower belt, you're going to be pretty thankful that no one cares that you got tapped by a lower belt because it happens to everybody. Number 5, learn how to learn. This has probably been the biggest game changer in my jiu-jitsu journey over the last couple years. As a white belt and a blue belt, and even at the early years of purple belt, I tried all sorts of stuff to improve my ability to learn jiu-jitsu. I watched instructional footage. I watched competition footage. I went to seminars. I filmed myself and then took written notes on my own rolls. I would go to class and I'd write down in a little journal about what the technique of the day was. I would get to class early and I would try to do 100 reps a day of whatever the technique was, 100 leg drags or 100 knee cut passes. And all that stuff I had varying degrees of success with. Nothing really stuck with me for more than just a month or two. It wasn't until I got turned on to Greg Souders and the stuff he's doing at Standard Jiu Jitsu, where he's using ecological dynamics and something that's called the constraints-led approach to help teach his students submission grappling. This video isn't going to be a deep dive on the constraints-led approach and constraint-based games. I actually have an interview with Greg Souders coming out here in a couple weeks, as well as one of his top students, DeAndre Corby. Definitely check that out. But I will say that using an ecological approach and using constraint-based games to help structure my own training has really helped me just skyrocket in my submission grappling skills. And what I love about that is that I feel like I found something that really worked best for me and how I like to learn. It's a lot of live rolling with specific focuses and intentions on working on specific skills. So instead of showing up to jiu-jitsu and doing 100 reps of a knee cut or doing 100 reps of an arm bar, I'm doing live training. It may almost look like it's positional training, but it's a little bit different than that, where I'm starting a certain position and I have a singular goal or a singular focus to build parts of what makes an arm bar effective. So that might be I'm starting in a certain position and I'm only focusing on separating the elbow from the body. Or I might start in a certain position and I'm only focusing on controlling the shoulder. Then as I start to progress, I start piecing those things together. So I may start in a certain position and I try to go all the way through the steps. Okay, control the shoulder, separate the elbow from the body, apply downward pressure to the mat, and using some of those constraint-based games. And it's honestly something that I'm still learning about. I'm not an ecological coach or an ecological dynamics expert by any means, but it's something that I've been trying to study a little bit more of and something that I found that's helped me learn much faster, and I've seen a huge improvement in my overall grappling game. Number 6, train hard, recover harder. Remember, it's not about what you do in the gym or on the mat that leads to progress. It's about what you do and can recover from. I know that when I was a white belt and when I was a blue belt, I trained all the freaking time. I would get up super early. I'd lift at 4 a.m. Then I'd go to the 6:30 a.m. gi class. I'd go to a coffee shop, have some coffee, maybe have a little bit of breakfast, and I'd go right back and do the 11 a.m. gi class. I was training all the freaking time. And I could only do that for bursts of a couple weeks before I felt completely burnt out and completely fried. At the same time, I was also collecting some minor injuries and some nagging aches and pains, and it was really frustrating and discouraging. And it took me a while to realize that my capacity to improve as a grappling athlete was directly impacted by how much I could recover from the work that I was doing on the mat and in the gym. And it's important to recognize that just because the class schedule at your jiu-jitsu school has 12 sessions a week, you don't need to go to all 12 of those sessions, especially if your body can't recover from all the work that you're doing. There are 3 things that I suggest you focus on if you want to improve your recovery as a grappling athlete, and that's going to be to dial in your sleep, dial in your nutrition, and dial in your training schedule. I guarantee that if you lock in those 3 areas over the next 30 days, you're going to feel way better. You're going to be very surprised at how quickly you start to see progress and improvements in your grappling skills. Number 7, stop holding your breath. If you're brand new to jiu-jitsu and you feel like you constantly gas out during live sparring, I can almost guarantee it's because you're tensing up and holding your breath. And it's really hard to not do that when you're just beginning jiu-jitsu. It's intense. It's hard. People are squishing you. People are grabbing your neck. People are twisting your arms and legs all over the place. It's natural for you to want to tense up and try to stay tight and keep everything safe. However, if you do that, you're going to gas out much faster. It may be hard to focus on right now, but I encourage you to focus on breathing in and out of your nose as much as possible during live sparring. Not only is this going to be a more efficient way of breathing, but it can also help you relax a little bit more, help prolong the point at which you gas out as a grappling athlete. This is something that when I first discovered it, I wish I could go back in time and tell my wrestler self to do that. When I was wrestling, I had paid no attention to my breathing. I just breathed however I needed to breathe. And my conditioning was pretty good. And even coming into jiu-jitsu, my conditioning was pretty good. But once I started focusing on nasal breathing during all of my live training, oh my goodness, I saw some immediate increases in my conditioning. And whether you want to say it's an immediate increase in conditioning or it's just being more efficient, doesn't really matter. It had the same positive effect on me. I felt like I could roll for longer durations of time before I gassed out, and it was very helpful. Number 8, jiu-jitsu will always be there. Life is going to get busy. Life is going to have different seasons where your schedule is super crazy and other seasons where your schedule is a little bit more laid back. And that may mean that during the crazy seasons, you may not be able to maintain training twice a day, every single day of the week, or whatever heavy jiu-jitsu schedule you had when you were single and had no kids. I know for myself, this was something that I wish someone had told me before I started training jiu-jitsu. When I was in college, that's when I started training jiu-jitsu. And during the summers, I would train all the time. I mentioned it earlier. I'd lift at 4 a.m., go to the 6:30 a.m. class, go to the 11 a.m. class. I was doing 3 different training sessions a day, almost every day of the week. It was awesome. But then when school started, I just couldn't maintain that same training schedule. And I used to feel so discouraged and so bummed out about it because I felt like I was missing training sessions. And I wish someone had just came to me at that point in my life and told me, hey, jiu-jitsu is always going to be there. This season of life may not be the season where you do the most amount of jiu-jitsu training possible. It may be the season where you focus on school, you focus on graduating college. And guess what? After you graduate college, jiu-jitsu is still going to be there. You can go back to training more often, you can put more time in the gym, you can put more time on the mat. And that's something that I learned in college and really helped set me up for other areas of my life where personally as a business owner, when things get busy and I haven't been able to train jiu-jitsu as often, just reminding myself in the back of my head that jiu-jitsu is always going to be there has helped a ton. There are going to be seasons of life where you can do more jiu-jitsu training. There are going to be seasons of life where you do less jiu-jitsu training. And jiu-jitsu is always going to be there, so don't trip. Go ahead and comment below how long you've been training jiu-jitsu and the number one piece of advice you've learned over the years of training jiu-jitsu, and I'll catch you guys later. Lift heavy, roll hard. Peace.